I now give the floor to Ms. Lisa Doughten.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Security Council. Here we are again in the aftermath of yet another horrendous episode in this brutal war in Gaza. Like Undersecretary General DiCarlo, we're deeply horrified by the strike on Tabi'een school in Ad-Daraj by Israeli forces on Saturday. The school was sheltering several hundred displaced families, many of whom had moved there because of recent evacuation orders. And the strike was conducted during dawn prayers. Initial reports suggest this was one of the deadliest attacks on a school sheltering displaced people since the start of this conflict. Tragically, this is far from an isolated incident. Indeed, such attacks appear to be occurring with increasing frequency. The most recent incidents include 3 schools hit within 48 hours between 3 and 4 August, and 2 schools hit on 8 August, all in Gaza City, with Tabi'een on Saturday, the latest such attack. According to OHCHR, this is at least the 21st strike on a school that has been serving as a shelter recorded since 4 July this year. Scores of people have been killed in these strikes, among them women and children. Mr. President, sadly, these large-scale incidents are only some of the myriad ways in which this horrendous conflict is causing unbearable suffering and devastation. Unremitting violence in Gaza has now killed almost 40,000 Palestinians and injured more than 90,000 others, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health. Some 10,000 people remain unaccounted for and are thought to be buried under the rubble. And as of 9 August, an estimated 115 hostages remain captive in Gaza, despite repeated demands for their release, including hostages who have been declared dead and whose remains are in Gaza. The health situation in Gaza remains critical and the healthcare system is barely functional, providing brave but limited support for the injured and the sick, for the women in childbirth, and against rapidly spreading disease. Thousands of patients in critical conditions are on waiting lists for medical evacuations. More than 60% of residential buildings and 65% of the road network have been damaged or destroyed, according to UN recent analysis. In just 2 weeks, more than 250,000 people have been displaced, often on multiple occasions. Evacuation orders, supposedly for civilian security, are clearly having the opposite outcome. Civilians are repeatedly asked to evacuate to areas where essentials for their survival are absent. They're repeatedly being killed and injured in the very places they've been told were safe to go. Shelters and displacement camps are reportedly used for military purposes by Palestinian armed groups, exposing those sheltering there to terrible danger. Overcrowding in these places is putting immense strain on already severely stretched water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. Acute respiratory infections, diarrheal illnesses, acute jaundice syndrome, and skin infections are all surging. And, very worryingly, with school immunization programs practically impossible, polio looms as a new threat after 6 circulating poliovirus strains were detected in environmental samples in June. As a matter of urgency, health workers must be allowed to carry out an immunization campaign. This war is destroying lives, dreams, and futures. More than 500,000 students have lost an entire academic year, with 39,000 students missing their final exams. Even if this war were to end today, we estimate that at least 8 in 10 schools would require rehabilitation. And we must not discount the immense emotional and psychological trauma this war has had on children, indeed, people of all ages, trauma they will carry for the rest of their lives. It bears repeating, there's no protection of civilians in Gaza. Alongside the relentless mass displacement within Gaza, many thousands of Palestinians have left and many more are trying to. As this conflict persists and lives are threatened daily, civilians must be allowed to seek protection. Those displaced must also be guaranteed the right to voluntarily return. What we're seeing in Gaza is the result of a war waged with pitiful, if any, regard for the requirements of international law. I share the Secretary General's and others' deep concern about violations of international humanitarian law being committed throughout this conflict. Mr. President, in the middle of the spiraling catastrophe in Gaza, the humanitarian community doggedly continues efforts to mount an effective response. We do what we can to increase food assistance, provide education support, and boost hospital capacity. Efforts are also ongoing to avert the spread of polio. And senior UN officials continue discussions with stakeholders, including senior Israeli officials, to increase the flow of aid into the Gaza Strip and improve conditions for the delivery on the ground. However, as things stand, access constraints and high levels of insecurity severely hamper the humanitarian response. Aid entering Gaza has more than halved since the Rafah ground operation began, and Rafah crossing was abruptly closed in early May. New limits imposed by Israeli authorities on bringing cash to Gaza are significantly limiting the resources available for operations. Fuel shortages mean water supplies have fallen as low as 2 liters per person per day, far below the 15 liters required. Organized crime and looting along the route used by humanitarians dispatching cargo from Kerem Shalom crossing continue to hinder aid delivery. Access to people in need remains a challenge. The increase in bureaucratic and administrative impediments, such as delays in visa issuance and renewals for broader operational support and management, is severely impacting the response. And our concerns for the safety of staff keep growing, with attacks on or near aid vehicles that have been coordinated on the rise. Recently, within a 12-day period, there's been 4 shooting incidents involving UN convoys, including on a vehicle carrying children on their way to be reunited with their father. NGOs and the Palestinian Red Crescent all report similar attacks. The result is that hundreds of thousands of people are not getting the life-saving humanitarian assistance they so desperately need. Mr. President, how much longer can this continue? How many more tragedies, such as the one in Tabi'een school, must happen before action is taken? Can this Council look at the children, the people of Gaza, and all those affected by this war in the eye, as humanitarian workers have to do every single day, and swear that no stone has been left unturned to end their suffering? The urgent requirements, so often repeated, remain the same. First, an immediate cessation of hostilities and sustained ceasefire. Secondly, strict adherence to international humanitarian law by all sides. This entails releasing all hostages. It also entails protecting civilians and meeting their essential needs, including by ensuring the unhindered provision of humanitarian assistance throughout Gaza, as ordered by the International Court of Justice, including through UNRWA. And lastly, we have said before in this context, all member states must use all of their leverage to prevent and stop violations of international humanitarian law, including through diplomatic and economic pressure, and conditioning arms exports on compliance with the rules of war and cooperation in combating impunity. We must remember that this is now one of the several conflicts in Gaza over the years which humanitarians have had to respond to. Conflicts that the population in Gaza was never afforded the ability to recover from or repair. The past 10 months have destroyed what little hope for a future existed for any surviving child. I urge this Council and all member states to use your influence to protect civilians and bring an end to this conflict and its intolerable toll. It's imperative that mutual security and lasting peace is pursued so that hope can be restored, so that civilians there can enjoy the hope that we take for granted and the hope that they have never experienced. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Doughten for her briefing. I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statement. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, I thank USG, Mrs. Rosemary DiCarlo, and OCHA Director, Mrs. Lisa Doughten, for their briefing. I will start my statement by the same question of Mrs. Doughten. How long? Is it going to be yet another ineffective, vain, and hopeless meeting of the Security Council? Are we going to count and count the number of deaths in Gaza? The answer is simple. This is neither what the Council is designed for, nor what the international community expects from us. More importantly, this is not how the Council should address the Palestinians' plea, the Palestinians' quest for justice, the Palestinian right to exist. Our Council has the legal and moral primary responsibility to act, and to act firmly, to shoulder its mandate in preserving international peace and security. Mr. President, for 311 days, our Council has been constantly fooled and disregarded, while an entire population has been subjected to a collective punishment. Last Saturday, the world woke up to yet another horrific bloodshed after the Israeli occupying power targeted deliberately a school in the Daraj neighborhood in Gaza. It was the third school bombed in 2 days. It was a civilian structure, sheltering civilians, by the testimony of the international community. Our Secretary General said it clearly. The school was sheltering hundreds of displaced Palestinian families. The Euro-made humanitarian rights monitor also stressed that the school was nothing but a dilapidated place that hundreds of families have taken refuge in. These testimonies of one of the survivors is harrowing. A father said that he has been given 18 kilogram of body parts, and he buried them as the body of his young son. Mr. President, this heinous massacre of Ad-Daraj and the previous ones wouldn't have been possible without the generous financial and military assistance freely provided to the Israeli aggressor. More than 100 innocent lives were sacrificed in Ad-Daraj, among them women and children, in addition to the nearly 40,000 Palestinian martyrs so far. Were these martyrs not human? With their dreams, with their hopes, as we all do? Is the Council's role limited to keeping a record of lost lives? Again, the answer is simple. Our Council must, and now, fulfill its responsibilities and honor its commitment. Its responsibility to tackle the root cause of the Palestinian question, which is the illegal occupation of the Palestinian land. Its responsibility to hold the occupying power accountable using all legal means, including sanctions. Yes, sanction mechanism. Third, its commitment to achieve a just and lasting peace in the Middle East and to prevent the dangerous escalation provoked by the Israeli occupying power. Mr. President, the Israeli occupying power continue to defy the very commitment of this Council, made in Resolution 2735, calling for the implementation of an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Immediate ceasefire in Gaza. This resolution is seriously jeopardized by the intensifying aggression of the Israeli occupying power against Gaza. Algeria warns against this continuing sabotage of effort made by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar to implement this resolution urgently and effectively. In this regard, Algeria expresses again its support for the mediation effort made by these three countries. There is no room for delaying or over-complicating negotiation by adding new conditionalities or new demand. Engaging in good faith in the initiative of President Biden is paramount to achieving the long-awaited ceasefire. Mr. President, for the sake of humanity's value, we must act now. Our inaction is costing life and jeopardizing the destiny of a whole people, the Palestinian people. I thank you.